What's up, guys? Since last week's video was so popular and it created a lot of discussions in the comment section, we're going to come back and talk about what some of the people had to say.
And some of our responses of what they were saying, you know. Some of the things were really good, some things we didn't agree with, but that doesn't mean it's not good. So we're going to go over all of that stuff in this week's video.
Alright, so first comment.
This is from Jess Triplet. I agree with what you said, and I'm not against tubs, but I do get sad seeing empty tubs or racks. I do think it's pet species, but say a small snake, you have them in a rack with just a water bowl, no plant or rock or bark or anything for enrichment. That's just the sad part, but I think you guys do an amazing job, and your animals are amazing. So you're obviously doing something right.
Thanks, Jess. I think that you might have a point. You know, sometimes breeders tend to keep the racks, you know, especially for snakes or something, with basically just a water bowl and just a substrate in there. I don't know if there's any studies done on reptile enrichment, whatever that means, you know, like your common sense would tell you that the reptiles would like to crawl and, you know, along like rocks and branches and climb and do all those sort of things. But we don't really know, but I really do see your point, and that's why we try to, you know, add as much, you know, foliage or decorations into our enclosures as we can, because especially with the geckos, like I do see a difference between the geckos that have a lot more hiding spots, foliage, and just overall, like, you know, decorations inside their tank versus the ones that don't. I think they do thrive a little better, but you know, I don't really know for sure, especially with snakes. We don't work a lot with snakes.
And if you guys do happen to know of like any scientific articles or studies that do show, you know, that enrichment is beneficial, please tag us. You know, we're
email it to us.
Yeah, email it to us, like, because we're always willing. You know, we want to learn, we want to evolve. One thing we also like to do is when we clean cages, you know, switch it up the next time so it is a little different from their, you know, typical setup.
I think we just do that because we don't remember exactly how it was, but yeah.
All right, this is the next one from Fraser Rudder. I think leaf-tailed geckos like naturalistic setups because their life revolves around their camouflage. So maybe they are more aware of the things in their enclosure than cresteds. They might search for branches that they know can camouflage against, and obviously they can't camouflage against egg crates, etc. So maybe they are aware of that. I agree, cresteds do great in tubs. My babies do fine in them. That's one of the things we kind of mentioned in the video, that it might be something that's species specific. Like some animals, like cresteds, will thrive in tubs and necessarily don't need a naturalistic setup, while other animals like panther chameleons or, like Fraser said, mossy leaf-tailed geckos, they might benefit from this naturalistic setup.
Yeah, but he brings a good point that like mossy leaf-tailed geckos or satanic leaf-tailed geckos in particular, their whole life kind of revolves around their ability to, you know, mimic the dead leaves or the moss in the tree. So maybe that's why they actually do better with like a naturalistic enclosure instead of like a simple kind of enclosure. So that's a really good point. I really didn't think of that before, so I wanted to point it out and tell you guys on the video.
Next one's from Curtis J. Berger Jr. Even humans can live fine in the jungle, but we sure live longer in houses. That's a dramatic example, but people have to be open-minded to why some people keep reptiles more simple. For one, it's cleaner, so less bacteria growth.
Exactly. So I thought that was a good point. People have been living in jungles long before, you know, modern civilization came about. They lived in the Amazons and all this, and in the deserts in Alaska, and it doesn't mean that that's necessarily better because that's what we started in. You know, definitely over time we have extended our life. Just so many more benefits to living in society. So it could be the same for these animals, you know. That's what I was trying to say. I think I mentioned it on another response to a comment. These geckos, like maybe a bigger enclosure with a naturalistic look might benefit that specific individual animal, but as a species, like as a whole, the species, it just probably wouldn't benefit if we all had to keep them like that, because breeders wouldn't get to produce as many numbers, and then the amount of actual the amount of animals would drastically decrease.
And it does, like David was saying, it can vary per individual as well. For example, I've had panther chameleon adult males who didn't do well in the standard 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot screen cages. They actually did a lot better in smaller cages. So some animals might do better in naturalistic glass setup, while others might do better in tub setups, even within like a crested gecko, which most of them seem to do very well in tubs. So you got to keep that in mind as well. That
Yeah.
we got to gauge the individual animal.
And if you guys don't believe us, and you have like a crested, like a baby crested gecko or a lychee or something, get a big 12 by 12 by 24 enclosure. Put your baby lychee or your baby crested gecko in there and see how it does, and then put it in a tub and then see how it does. We have done this. We have, lived through these experiences. That's why we could tell you they tend to do a lot better in, smaller enclosures and tubs. But if you don't believe us, go ahead and try it.
And it's funny, sometimes you give these animals these giant spaces, and the crested gecko is going to be hiding in the tightest space of the entire enclosure.
Yeah.
So, and not just that, many animals do that, so that's something else to keep in mind.
Yep.
Now, next one, I can't read your name.
That's Antonio.
Okay, Antonio. Yeah. Reptiles, especially crested geckos, are very simple creatures. They don't get depressed or have mental issues. If they're not doing well, that is reflected in their physical well-being. So, if you see an active, strong, healthy gecko, the gecko is doing fine, either in a tub or in a vivarium. Of course, humans tend to anthropomorphize reptiles' behavior. In fact, all behaviors. It's normal. It's part of what we are.
I think he's 100% right. Crested geckos, or most geckos in general, they're not the smartest creatures. I don't think their brain has the capability of being like ambitious in the sense of like, oh, I wish I had a bigger enclosure. I think they live instinctually and they just live in the moment. So am I safe now? Yes. Am I full now? Do I have a nice full belly now? Yes. And then that's how they live and that's how they thrive. He says that they don't have the ability to get depressed or anything. I think I agree. I mean, we might be wrong for all we know, but from everything we've seen, if the animal has its basic requirements met, they're gonna thrive. And these guys, if you literally put a bowl of crickets in front of the crested gecko and it sees the crickets through the bowl, it's gonna smash its head into the bowl 50 times and then give up instead of like going up and around the bowl and getting the crickets. So they're not very smart, and we love these things, but it's just the honest truth. So I don't know if they have the ability to think that far ahead or to internalize where they are or anything.
That's something I kind of brought up in the prior video, that we do like to give everything human emotions. It's we do that with every single living organism. And like David was saying, they might not have the capability to feel that way. Oh, I'm not free. Oh, I'm in a small tub and it's not naturalistic. Like they might not have this ability, Just because we do, just because animals that we hang out with like dogs and stuff do, dogs are way smarter than a lot of these reptiles.
And even dogs kind of like live in the moment, they're not like, oh, I wish my owner gets a bigger house, they're just kind of live in the moment. They're happy in your little apartment if they're fed and they get love, and some of these animals are just the same.
All right, this is the next one from Kebran. I can't really see the name, but Kebran. I like your videos a lot. However, I have to slightly disagree with your opinion here. While I accept tub breeding and I have some cresties in plastic containers, I do believe that giving them a naturalistic setup is better. They can see and have a big enough brain to see the difference between a colorful green enclosure and a bland white-brown one. Another thing I disagree is the argument that if the animal could choose, it would prefer captivity and safety over being free but having to survive. Not just because freedom may have a variable value, but because many captive reptiles suffer because people do not provide that safety. Ideally, maybe, but in practice, maybe not. And we should not decide what animals would prefer. We simply cannot know. I also think that if prices went up because more breeders switched to larger naturalistic bioactive enclosures, it would do good to the animals. Less kids would get cheap pet reptile. Most kids do not care properly. If the price increases, the people who buys them would be inclined to provide better care.
Okay, so this is a multiple.
Yeah.
We gotta address multiple things in this question, or in this comment. Um,
Let's do the first part where we
So-
talk about they could see the
Yeah.
difference in greens. That's not necessarily true. There's the way the full spectrum lighting that we see in animals, see in different reptiles or different mammals, it's different. For example,
Panther
yeah,
chameleons see like
you-
ultraviolet
yeah,
light,
which we
don't.
cannot see.
And-
So they're seeing a different world than what we are. And then a nocturnal animal like a crested gecko is seeing a completely different world than what
Yeah,
we are.
we're not even sure if even do they know if dogs see black and white or if they see colors or what?
I don't remember if it's black and white, but I
But-
know it's drastically different from us.
So, well, that's dogs, right? But in a crested gecko, that's a nocturnal animal. I don't know. This is just my logic or my reasoning, but I would think that they don't have to see. It's not very important for them to see colors, because they do have a very good sense of smell and taste, and they're nocturnal. When there's the absence of light, you're not really gonna see the colors. But who knows? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I don't think there's any evidence that suggests that the geckos could see color and that they would prefer a bright branch over a dull, enclosure. But next.
The second part of this is that he was disagreeing that they prefer that we think they prefer captivity over wilds because
And
they have
that's
to
just
survive.
hypothetical,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, and because like some people don't give them proper care, which is very true. But I think especially with something like a crested gecko, something that has a lot of evidence out there of how to properly take care of the animal, a lot of information. All you really have to do is just put a simple Google search and you can find proper care on the animal. There are always going to be people who don't take care of their animals properly, get bad advice.
Right, and I mean that argument can go both ways, right? Like, yes, there might be some animals in captivity that aren't taken care of properly, but then again, there might be some animals in the wild that are, getting jacked up by a
Eaten.
predator, or
Starved to death.
starved to death, or
Nature is brutal. We like to kind of romanticize nature, how it's perfectly balanced. A part of that balance is being eaten, starving to death, like dehydrating to death. There's a lot of ways to go in nature, and it could take you any day.
Okay, and another one is we simply don't know. I also think that if prices went up because more breeders switched to larger naturalistic bioactive enclosures, it would be good for the animals. Well, we don't really know. The reason is, that's like the butterfly effect, right? We can't just say like it would be better for the animals because I know for sure that there wouldn't be as many animals out here, especially in the States or in captivity. The people who mass produce them, that originally brought them in the country and mass produced them, they kept them in super simple enclosures, and they just, if you think our rack systems are bad, you should see theirs. I mean, and this is not throwing shade or anything. I respect those people a lot. But literally 95% of everybody that has geckos right now would not have them, so you can't say it'd be better for the animals because first of all the prices would be skyrocket. I think the first pair of crested geckos that ever came into the US that were sold for like a crate like $15,000 or something, and if everybody was required to keep them and breed them in naturalistic enclosures, obviously the price would go up, the amount of people producing them would drastically go down because they can't mass produce them. There's no way you could take care of, 1,000 naturalistic enclosures the way you can with 1,000, normal simple enclosures. I mean, just think about like the amount of eggs that would be lost because the eggs will be laid anywhere, not in the lay box, or, like just so many different variables. It's literally the butterfly effect. Like if that would have happened, then the whole reptile industry would be different. Like we wouldn't be here. I'd probably be like somewhere else doing some other thing. Like it's just, you know, that the one of the reasons why the reptile industry is growing and thriving is because there's animals that are very simple to take care of, and they thrive in captivity, and a lot of people are able to get them. If nobody's able to get a reptile or a lizard, then the business or the industry is not going to grow. The hobby is going to stay very small, and that may be good for rich, for rich enthusiasts, but it's not good for the common people. I certainly wouldn't be able to afford a $15,000 pair of crested geckos.
Especially not when we first got into it.
Yeah, or especially not even now. I
Yeah.
wouldn't. It doesn't make business sense unless I'm filthy rich, and then still doesn't make business sense. It would just be like a a pet or something. But whatever. I think we still have another comment.
And to add something to that, like David was mentioning about the mass production, I actually think that's a good thing. Some people think that mass producing can be bad, but one of the good things that can come from that is the native wild populations of these animals can be helped drastically. Like, for example, crested geckos. If we weren't able to reproduce them, and maintain them so cheaply, there wouldn't be as many babies. Not only would we have less, there would be more smuggling of those animals in an already damaged wild population. Instead, we got them to the point, it's so cheap to raise them, sometimes we can sell some for like $30-$40, which it wouldn't make any sense to smuggle any from New Caledonia, helping their native population. And like there's probably more crested gecko in the United States than there is in the wild.
100%
so if
more.
anything ever happens into the wild populations, we could always reestablish them with our with the crested geckos we have here or in other places. So it's good for the wildlife too.
And to play devil's advocate, I do see some problems with, mass producing something, like, for example, like at a chicken farm or something, where the chickens are like, literally have like a square foot of room to move in, and they're all full of diseases and all this. I do see that problem, don't get me wrong, but obviously if your primary motive for being in this industry is the love for the animals, then you wouldn't let something like that happen. So I do see like some of the concerns that most people have, that all these animals are being housed together and they're developing diseases, and they don't have much room to like interact or move, and dozens are dying, and like all these things. I understand that, but that has to be, you can't penalize, if some breeder out there is doing that, you can't penalize the rest of the breeders and say, okay, now all of you have to keep them in naturalistic bioactive enclosures because these guys, did the wrong thing. Those people have to be penalized, and then if the other people are, doing their job correctly, then, there shouldn't be a problem as long as the animals are thriving, I think. There was a lot more comments, but obviously we can't get to all of them. We picked out some that we thought were really interesting and made some good points. But like we said in the previous video, if you want to add to the conversation, if you have any questions or you have any concerns, or you don't agree with us, feel free to drop it in the comments below. As long as you're not disrespectful, we're not gonna have a problem. I love to discuss this, and because if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. If I truly think I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But I really don't think that it's wrong to keep some of these animals in, simple enclosures, because they do thrive. So, would love to hear again what you guys have to say about it. And as always, follow us on all the social media if you like what we put out. And we'll see you next week.